So about 2 years ago to the day, I was here in Reykjavik with my friend Amy, and we looked at the geysers and we studied the glaciers and were impressed by the stunning scenery, and we drank some of that hideous sheep dung whiskey, and we also decided that those gorgeous jumpers were just way out of our price range. But I also took her on a walking tour of the financial crash. And it was a fantastic tour, and we walked around several key sites, and there's a phrase that our guide kept saying again and again as part of his explanation of what happened to the economy here in Iceland. And he kept talking about success-induced bias. And I think it's an extraordinary phrase because it doesn't just explain what happened to the Icelandic economy. It is one of the core, I think, problems that is facing our global economic system. We are suffering from success-induced bias. We've got this assumption that just because a recipe maybe to some degree worked fair enough, moderately well in the past, we just blithely assume we can carry on using it. And what I mean by that is, we will all have our favorite example of how the world today is better than it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, even 100 years ago. We can all point to statistics and research about how there has been progress, whether it's mothers and babies surviving childbirth, whether it's falling levels of illiteracy, whether it's expansion of the democratic franchise, whether it's women coming into the labour market and we're starting to close gender inequality gap, whether it's better food, whether it's even better music, though if you looked at my playlist, you'd doubt about that one. But there are examples, or it's typhoid almost being eradicated. There are examples of where when economic growth has been pro-poor and used to invest in our collective institutions such as health and education, things have improved, things have got better. But the challenge is that we've got this mindset of success-induced bias. We assume that what was helpful in the past can just be carried on into the future. And the challenge is that I think it is time to start asking questions. Are those fruits of growth beginning to rot? And we see examples of that all around and every day. We see how the sort of economic growth we've got at the moment is desperately unsafe. We see it in the impact. Almost every day there's another report that gives us an example of the extent of environmental breakdown. We see it on the impact of communities today already being hit by what happens when you put Mother Nature beyond her limits. We see it in the placards of young people who are coming out of their schools and calling out politicians in the face of their intransigence. And we see it in the pages of report after report from scientific experts saying enough is enough. Their warnings and their linking of that environmental breakdown to the economic growth models are getting louder and louder. So it's an unsafe form of growth. But it's also a desperately unevenly shared harvest. Our world is massively insecure. And you only have to look at the report from the World Inequality Report. These are over 100 scholars of economic inequality, led by Thomas Piketty. And they say that 7 in 10 of us are living in countries where economic inequality is getting worse. Earlier this year, my former employer, Oxfam, reported that of all the wealth that was created last year, 82% of it went to the richest 1% of the world's population. So the growth that's being created is being siphoned up to the very, very few at the top, while the poorest half of the world's population got nothing last year, according to Oxfam. So it's a very unevenly shared harvest. But it's also a sort of economic growth that is hurting us. The damage we do to our communities and to individuals in the name of pursuing more growth, of pushing down faster on that pedal of more and more GDP, is hurting us. We're feeling precarious, we're feeling lonely, we're anxious, and we're depressed. Self-harm is rising. And what we're doing is we're reaching for apparent coping mechanisms at the pill box in forms of self-medication and at the ballot box in terms of these crazy political solutions that are being waved in our face. So it's an economic system that is unsafe, unevenly shared harvest, and it's hurting us. And to make sense of that, there are 3 concepts that I find extraordinarily useful. One of them is diminishing marginal returns. Now, those of you who have studied economics will have learnt that in Economics 101. For those of you who haven't, if you've ever gone to a cheese counter and you've enjoyed the first bite of cheese and probably the second bite of cheese and the third bite of cheese, you're still liking it, maybe you get to the 8th, you're a bit meh. By the time you get to the 28th bite of cheese, you'll know what I mean by diminishing marginal returns. You basically get less bang for your buck the more you have. And so it is with whether it's families on low incomes or countries and economies. In early stages of economic development, when growth is used well, when it's pro-poor, when it's invested, these are really important caveats. When it's invested in our collective institutions, you do get improved social progress for more GDP growth. And that's whether it's in terms of subjective self-reported well-being, whether it's various other dimensions of social progress, for example, as reported by the Social Progress Indicator, or whether it's a Human Development Index. Whatever measure of social progress, you see the same increased early stages of economic development, growth matters, but then those benefits start to tail off. And yet, we keep pushing down on that pedal of economic growth. But there's also another concept that I find really useful to understand what's going on. It's this idea of failure demand. This idea that so much of what we're now spending the fruits of growth on is basically to treat, to heal, to fix, and to repair the damage that we've done in chasing that additional growth. So we're like a dog chasing its tail. We've got this insane, daft, desperately inefficient system where we're doing great harm to people and planet, and then we say, oh, we need new growth to repair that. And it's defensive expenditure in environmental terms, or even in individual terms. The French economist Serge Latouche talks about consolation goods. The fact that because of us being stressed and alienated and suffering, we then reach to console ourselves, whether it's a bottle of red wine at the end of a stressful week or the pamper weekends that are marketed to mothers who are pressured to have it all. We're consoling ourselves. And that relates to my third piece, which is around pseudo-satisfiers, which comes from one of our favourite economists, Manfred Max Neef. And he says that all of us have really universal, fundamental human needs. And we can satisfy them in different ways, and that's where you get diversities of cultures and diversities of economic systems. But so often we have these pseudo-satisfiers waved in our face. And whether it's Ray-Bans, a sunglass company, telling us that if you buy another pair of Ray-Bans, you'll meet your need for belonging, or whether it's Coca-Cola saying that your need for social affiliation will be fulfilled by having another Coke, so it is in the macroeconomy. Our needs for decent jobs, for security, for shelter, for a stable livelihood, we're searching for that pseudo-satisfier of GDP growth. So we've got a pretty daft setup here. And it has been observed that this economic system that we've got is not just, it's not intelligent, it's not beautiful, and it does not deliver the goods. And this observation went on and it said, in short, we dislike it and we are beginning to despise it. But when we come to think about what to put in its place, we are extremely perplexed. This was John Maynard Keynes writing in 1933. And I think now, halfway through 2019, with all the collective wisdom in rooms like this and in communities around the world, we do know what to put in its place. And for me, the chance is to recognize that GDP-rich countries have arrived, that the work of growth is beyond done. We have got enough wealth and resources. We're just really bad at sharing and cherishing them. And so what we desperately need to do is shift gear, recognize we've arrived, and make ourselves at home. And that's a very, very different sort of economy to one that is headlong focusing on faster GDP growth. We call it a well-being economy. But essentially, it's an economy that repurposes itself to focus on aligning the economic activity with what humans and the planet ultimately needs. It's giving a better, more social purpose to business, using that business activity to deliver social and environmental returns. It's about ensuring that people are at the forefront of economic development setting through participatory budgeting. It's about making sure that everyone has enough work, but not too much. We've got extreme inequality in the labour market, but also making sure people have good work. And that's not complicated. That's redesigning how we do jobs, making sure the robots are on tap rather than on top so that they maybe eradicate some of the undignified or just hard work, but we can free people up to do work that's got meaning and purpose. And the good thing is that there are examples of this happening They're microcosms of an economy that makes itself at home all over the world. Across the world, there are pockets of good practice. So recognizing that we've arrived and understanding that the task now is to make ourselves at home, and particularly in GDP-rich countries, because then our cousins in countries that have not yet got enough will not have a fighting chance of increasing their material living standards. And that's a really important global justice element to this. We need to do this urgently. And so the good thing is that we can learn from the examples, and the key task then is to collect them all up, amplify them, network them, help them have more impact, so that together they are no longer the exception that proves the rule, but they are absolutely the core of an economy that makes itself at home. And essentially, it's about ensuring that the economic system works for people and planet first time around, rather than having to cope and fix and clean up at the end of the day. It's about having humanity determine economics rather than the other way around. Thank you so much.